The House of My Mother, A Daughter's Quest for Freedom by Shari Franca. Introduction: A story behind the perfect facade. Welcome to this comprehensive summary of The House of My Mother by Shari Franca. This memoir pulls back the curtain on one of YouTube's most popular family vlogging channels, 8 Passengers, which captivated 2.5 million subscribers with its picture-perfect portrayal of Mormon family life. But behind the smiling faces and wholesome content lay a darker reality of control, manipulation, and abuse. Shari Franca, the eldest of 6 children, courageously shares her story, not just to set the record straight, but to advocate against family vlogging and expose how the pursuit of online perfection can mask devastating harm. This is a story about survival, resilience, and ultimately, freedom. Part 1. The Foundation, Before the Cameras. Ruby's Dream and Early Parenting. The story begins with Ruby Griffiths, who grew up dreaming of fulfilling what she believed was her divine purpose, becoming a mother. Raised in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, Ruby attended college primarily to find a husband. She quickly met Kevin Franca, and within months of meeting, they were married. In 2003, their first child, Shari, was born. From the very beginning, Ruby's parenting style was harsh and emotionally distant. She practiced the controversial cry it out method, leaving baby Shari to cry alone for extended periods. Even as an infant, Shari longed for her mother's love and affection, but it rarely came. Ruby enforced strict discipline and maintained rigid control over her children's lives, believing this approach would mold them into obedient, righteous individuals. A growing family. Over the next decade, 5 more children joined the family: Chad, Abby, Julie, Russell, and Eve. The Franca household operated under Ruby's unyielding moral code. She demanded perfection from her children, and any deviation was met with harsh consequences. Shari grew up walking on eggshells, constantly anxious about triggering her mother's rage. Ruby's parenting wasn't just strict, it was emotionally neglectful. She rarely showed warmth or affection. Love in the Franca household was conditional, earned only through obedience and compliance. For Shari, this meant spending her childhood desperately seeking her mother's approval, a validation that never quite came. The impact on Shari's mental health. By her early teenage years, Shari was struggling with severe anxiety and depression. The constant pressure to be perfect, combined with the lack of emotional support, took a heavy toll. She experienced panic attacks and intrusive thoughts, but felt she couldn't speak openly about her struggles. When Shari finally asked for help, Ruby initially resisted, suggesting that Shari's symptoms were just attention-seeking behavior. Kevin eventually convinced Ruby to let Shari see a therapist. However, when Shari revealed to her therapist that she hated playing piano, something Ruby had forced her to do since age 5, and the therapist helped Shari communicate this to Ruby, Ruby quickly cancelled all future therapy sessions. Ruby couldn't tolerate any challenge to her authority or any suggestion that her parenting might be flawed. Part 2. 8. Passengers. Life under the camera's gaze. The birth of a YouTube empire. In 2015, inspired by her sisters who had started their own family vlogs, Ruby launched the 8 Passengers YouTube channel. The concept was simple: document the daily life of their large Mormon family. The content presented an idealized version of their lives: wholesome activities, family dinners, holiday celebrations, and Ruby dispensing parenting advice. The channel exploded in popularity. Within months, they surpassed the 1,000 subscriber mark, qualifying for ad revenue. Soon they had tens of thousands of followers, then hundreds of thousands, eventually reaching over 2.5 million subscribers. The family was making thousands of dollars monthly from ad revenue and sponsorships. They received free products to review and took all expenses paid vacations. The cost of fame for Shari. For Shari, who was entering adolescence when the vlogging began, being constantly filmed was agonizing. Every moment of her life was documented and uploaded for millions to see. She had no privacy, no opportunity to make mistakes away from public scrutiny. The camera became another form of control. Not only did she have to please her mother, but she also had to perform for an audience. Shari describes feeling like she was living in a real-life Truman Show. The line between genuine moments and performance blurred completely. Sometimes she couldn't tell if her family members were having authentic interactions or performing for the camera. Her identity became fractured between who she really was and who she was expected to be on screen. The constant exposure during her formative years had profound effects on her sense of self, her understanding of privacy, and her relationships. She never consented to this life of fame. She was simply born into it and had no choice. This raises crucial questions. What does consent look like when you're a child too afraid to say no? How do children develop a healthy sense of self when their every move is broadcast to millions? The dark side of perfect parenting. As the channel grew, Ruby's parenting became even more extreme. The quest for content and the pressure to maintain their perfect image intensified Ruby's need for control. Punishments became harsher and more creative. Ruby publicly defended controversial parenting decisions on camera, portraying herself as someone willing to make tough but necessary choices. Viewers began to notice concerning patterns. Ruby would share parenting wins that many found troubling, withholding meals as punishment, denying children basic comforts, and enforcing increasingly rigid rules. But Ruby framed these as examples of strong, principled parenting, and her devoted followers praised her for not being a soft parent. For Shari, the vlogging made everything worse. Not only was she living under Ruby's tyrannical control, but now that control was being celebrated by millions of people who had no idea what happened when the cameras turned off. Part 3. Connections. The cult-like influence. Enter Jodi Hildebrandt. Around 2019, Ruby and Kevin began attending sessions with Jodi Hildebrandt, a relationship coach who ran a program called Connections. Hildebrandt presented herself as a mental health expert who could help families address behavioral issues and build stronger relationships. Initially, Connections seemed like it might be helpful. The program talked about accountability, personal growth, and breaking unhealthy patterns. But as the Franca family became more deeply involved, it became clear that Connections functioned more like a cult than a legitimate therapeutic program. The Connections program and its tactics. Hildebrandt's program had several characteristics of a cult. Rigid hierarchy. Hildebrandt maintained absolute control as the sole moral authority. Only she could provide approval and moral insights to members. Superiority complex. Members were taught they were more enlightened than people outside the program. They possessed special knowledge that others couldn't understand. Isolation. Connections encouraged members to cut ties with anyone who didn't share the group's beliefs. This isolation was framed as a test of commitment and loyalty. During this period, Ruby severed relationships with her own parents and siblings. Distorted thinking. The program introduced concepts of distorted thinking that could be applied to almost any normal human emotion or desire. Wanting comfort, expressing negative emotions, or questioning authority were all labeled as distorted thinking that needed to be corrected. Dependency. Members became emotionally and psychologically dependent on Hildebrandt for guidance on every aspect of their lives. Shari's experience with connections. Initially, even Shari found some of Connection's ideas compelling. When you've been raised to believe something is wrong with you, teachings that promise to fix your flaws can be appealing. Hildebrandt told Shari that thinking positively about herself was actually arrogance and a form of distorted thinking. This deeply confused Shari and damaged her already fragile self-esteem. As someone who lacked the life experience and self-awareness to challenge these ideas, Shari initially accepted Hildebrandt's interpretations without question. This illustrates a crucial danger of therapeutic programs for young people. They may accept harmful or inaccurate teachings from authority figures without the capacity to critically evaluate them. The family fractures. Kevin, despite initial skepticism, eventually bought into Connections completely. The program drove a wedge between family members. Under Hildebrandt's influence, Ruby's behavior became even more extreme. She began seeing distorted thinking everywhere and responded with increasingly severe punishments. Part 4. The Downfall. When everything collapsed. The public cancellation. In 2020, the perfect image that Ruby had carefully constructed began to crumble. In a now infamous video, Chad revealed that he had been sleeping on a beanbag for 7 months. Ruby explained that he had lost his privilege to have a bedroom after playing a prank on his younger brother. The revelation sparked immediate and intense public outrage. Viewers who had long suspected something was wrong with Ruby's parenting now had concrete evidence. The backlash was swift and severe. Sponsors distanced themselves from the channel. Hundreds of thousands of subscribers left. The family became social media pariahs as viewers combed through years of content looking for additional evidence of problematic parenting. The 8 Passengers empire was effectively over, but the damage to the family was just beginning. Jody moves in. In 2021, Hildebrandt moved into the Franca family home. Ruby claimed that Jody was experiencing spiritual attacks from the devil and needed protection. The household atmosphere became chaotic and secretive. Ruby began sleeping in Hildebrandt's room, ostensibly to help with Jody's night terrors, something Ruby had never done for Shari during her childhood struggles. Shari observed suspicious behavior that led her to suspect an inappropriate, intimate relationship between Ruby and Jody, though this remained unconfirmed. Ruby forbade Kevin from going upstairs where Hildebrandt's bedroom was located. The household dynamics became increasingly bizarre and cult-like. Hildebrandt's influence over Ruby was complete. Shari is disowned. As Shari grew older and began questioning the family's involvement with Connections, Ruby viewed this as betrayal. The teachings of Connections demanded that members cut off anyone who challenged the program or showed signs of distorted thinking. In 2022, Ruby disowned Shari. She was cut off from her 5 younger siblings completely. For Shari, who was attending Brigham Young University, this was devastating. She had no information about her siblings' well-being or whereabouts. She was haunted by fears of what might be happening to them in that house. The escalation of abuse. After Ruby severed ties with Kevin, Chad, and Shari, the situation for the younger children became dire. Ruby removed them from school, got rid of the family dog so the children wouldn't have an excuse to leave the house, and isolated them from the outside world completely. Under Hildebrandt's guidance, Ruby implemented severe and inhumane disciplinary measures. The children were subjected to food deprivation, forced physical exertion, physical restraint, and psychological torture. Ruby and Jody believed they were engaged in a form of spiritual purification, but they were committing serious child abuse. Shari made desperate attempts to intervene. She called government agencies and child protective services, trying to get someone to check on her siblings. Each time, she was met with bureaucratic indifference. The system that was supposed to protect vulnerable children failed them completely. The day everything changed. On August 30th, 2023, Shari received a frantic phone call that would change everything. She was at her college apartment when someone called to tell her that police were at her mother's house with guns drawn, about to break down the door. Shari's immediate thought was the worst possible scenario. Her siblings were dead. In a panic, she drove to Springville, Utah, a house she hadn't visited since being disowned a year earlier. What had happened was both horrifying and miraculous. One of the younger children, emaciated and desperate, had managed to escape and reach a neighbor's house. The child had duct tape on their wrists and ankles. The neighbor immediately called 911. When police arrived, they found the children in appalling conditions, severely malnourished, covered in wounds, showing signs of physical and psychological torture. The rescue of these children was a miracle. Had the child not escaped when they did, the outcome could have been far worse. Ruby Franke and Jody Hildebrandt were arrested on the spot and charged with multiple counts of aggravated child abuse. Finally, as the news broke and details emerged, Shari posted a photo on social media of police cars outside her mother's house. Her caption was a single word: finally. That one word captured years of suffering, frustration, and validation. Shari had been trying to tell people what was happening. She had been calling for help. And now, finally, the truth was exposed, and her siblings were safe. Part 5. Aftermath and Healing. The legal proceedings. Ruby Franke and Jody Hildebrandt were both found guilty of multiple charges of aggravated child abuse. On February 29th, 2024, they were sentenced. The legal system that had failed to protect the children while they were being abused at least held their abusers accountable after the fact. The case drew national attention and sparked important conversations about family vlogging, the exploitation of children on social media, and the dangers of unregulated life coaching programs that can operate like cults. Kevin's return and the family's recovery. After Ruby's arrest, Kevin Franke, who had been separated from his children under Ruby's orders, returned to the family. He began therapy to understand his role in what had happened and how his passivity had enabled the abuse. Kevin worked to transform Ruby's house into an actual home. He adopted puppies, and both he and Shari each got a cat. These small acts represented a new beginning, bringing warmth and life into a space that had been defined by coldness and control. The younger children were placed in safe environments and began receiving the help they desperately needed. The road to recovery would be long, but they were finally free from their tormentors. Shari's healing journey. For Shari, the aftermath was complex. On one hand, there was relief and validation. Her mother was in prison, her siblings were safe, and the world now knew the truth. On the other hand, she faced the difficult work of processing her own trauma and rebuilding her life. Shari committed to therapy and self-work. She found what she calls a chosen family, people who care for her unconditionally, in a way her mother never did. This support system has been crucial to her healing. Through therapy, Shari gained several critical insights. Understanding the abuse. She came to recognize that what she experienced was genuine emotional abuse, not just strict parenting. Naming it was an important step in healing from it. breaking the cycle. Shari is determined not to repeat the patterns of abuse and control. She wants to parent differently, to love unconditionally, to prioritize emotional health over obedience. Finding her voice. Writing this memoir was part of Shari's healing process. For years, her mother controlled the narrative about their family. Now, Shari gets to tell her own story, in her own words, recognizing her mother's condition. Shari has come to understand that Ruby likely suffers from narcissistic personality disorder. She describes it as a shield Ruby developed to protect herself from feelings of inadequacy and harm she suffered in her own childhood. While this doesn't excuse Ruby's actions, it helps Shari understand them. Ruby's response to her own pain was to inflict pain on others, particularly her children. The media circus and reclaiming the narrative. In a surreal twist, Shari and her family found themselves at the center of intense media attention. They worked with a documentary director to share their experiences on their own terms. In one particularly meta moment, they watched a television documentary about Ruby's case while simultaneously being filmed by the documentary crew they were working with. This experience highlighted the ongoing exploitation of their trauma. Even in trying to reclaim their story, they found themselves in situations where their pain was being packaged for public consumption. The line between sharing one's truth and having that truth exploited for entertainment remained uncomfortably thin. Shari wrote this memoir partly to put boundaries around what she's willing to share. She wanted to tell everything she felt comfortable revealing, and nothing more. By doing so, she hoped to recover some of the privacy the family lost when they became vloggers. Part 6. The Bigger Picture. Lessons and Advocacy. The problem with family vlogging. One of Shari's primary motivations for writing this book is to advocate against family vlogging. Her story illustrates several fundamental problems with the practice. Children cannot consent. Children lack the maturity and power to truly consent to having their lives broadcast to millions. They can't understand the long-term implications of having their childhood documented and monetized. When Shari was young and asked if she wanted to be in videos, how could she have said no? Refusing would have meant disappointing her mother and potentially facing punishment. Privacy violations. Children deserve privacy, especially during vulnerable developmental stages. Being constantly filmed robs them of the ability to make mistakes, express emotions, and explore their identities away from public scrutiny. Performance versus authenticity. Growing up on camera creates confusion about authenticity. Shari describes how she could no longer tell when interactions were genuine versus when they were performances. This blurred line can damage a child's sense of self and their ability to form authentic relationships. Financial exploitation. Children in family vlogs are often the primary content generators, yet they typically see little to no direct financial benefit. They're working, but without the protections and compensation that child actors receive. Enables abuse. In the Franca family's case, vlogging provided cover for abuse. Ruby could present herself as a strong, principled parent while committing serious harm behind the scenes. The public validation she received for her harsh parenting likely reinforced and escalated her abusive behavior. The role of religious culture. Throughout the memoir, Shari touches on how her upbringing in the LDS Church influenced the family dynamics. While she maintains her faith, she acknowledges how certain aspects of the religious culture enabled abuse. Emphasis on obedience. The strong emphasis on obedience to authority, particularly parental and religious authority, made it difficult for Shari to trust her own judgment or question what was happening. Appearance of perfection. The cultural pressure to project an image of a perfect, righteous family discouraged openness about struggles and problems. This same pressure dovetailed with the demands of their public YouTube persona. Gender roles. Traditional gender roles meant Ruby's primary identity was as a mother, perhaps contributing to her extreme fixation on parenting and her inability to separate her self-worth from how her children behaved. While Shari notes that many people practice their faith in healthy, loving ways, she recognizes that certain cultural elements created an environment where her mother's abuse could flourish unchecked. The failure of protective systems. Shari's repeated attempts to get help for her siblings and the system's failure to respond illustrates serious problems in child protective services, understaffing and overwhelm. Child protective agencies are often severely understaffed and overwhelmed, making it difficult to thoroughly investigate every concern. High bar for intervention. The threshold for removing children from their homes is very high, which protects family integrity, but can leave vulnerable children in dangerous situations. Celebrity, influencer, blind spots. Families with public profiles and apparent success may face less scrutiny, as their public image provides a veneer of respectability. Kevin Franca later testified before Utah lawmakers about the need for reform in the child welfare system, advocating for better staffing and more effective protocols for protecting children. Questions about voyeurism and media consumption. Shari raises thoughtful questions about society's consumption of others' trauma. She asks, how does the public's consumption of others' pain cross the line from empathy to voyeurism? How quickly have we become numb to the struggles of others? Her family's story became entertainment, first as a family vlog, then as a true crime story. While Shari chose to share her perspective through this memoir, she remains thoughtfully aware of the complicated ethics around trauma narratives in popular media. Part 7. Moving forward. Hope and freedom. Finding true freedom. For Shari, freedom has meant several things. Physical freedom. She's free from her mother's control, free to make her own choices, and free to pursue her own path. Emotional freedom. Through therapy, she's working to free herself from the psychological patterns of abuse, the constant anxiety, the need for external validation, the feeling that she's fundamentally flawed. Freedom to tell her truth. For years, Ruby controlled the narrative. Now Shari has claimed that power for herself. Freedom from performing. Perhaps most significantly, Shari has stepped back from public life. She's no longer performing for an audience. She can just be herself. A private life at last. In a recent Instagram post, Shari shared news of her engagement and announced that she's moving toward a more private life. This decision represents the ultimate reclaiming of what was stolen from her: her privacy, her autonomy, her right to live without an audience. As she says in her own words, moving on with her life is true freedom and joy. The promise to break the cycle. Shari ends her memoir with a promise to break the cycle of abuse. She's determined that if she becomes a parent someday, she will parent differently. She will show up with unconditional love, emotional availability, and respect for her children's autonomy and dignity. She acknowledges that her mother's narcissism was likely a response to her own childhood trauma, a shield against feelings of inadequacy. But that shield caused terrible harm to her children. Shari is committed to processing her own trauma in healthier ways, to seeking help when she needs it, and to never using control and cruelty as parenting tools. She promises to look toward the future while never forgetting the lessons of the past. Conclusion. What we can learn. The House of My Mother is more than one family's story. It's a cautionary tale about multiple intersecting issues. The dark side of social media, fame. The book exposes how the pursuit of online perfection and the monetization of family life can create conditions for exploitation and abuse. The danger of unregulated coaching programs. Hildebrandt's Connexions program illustrates how life coaching can cross the line into cult-like manipulation, especially when it preys on vulnerable families and lacks oversight. The resilience of the human spirit. Despite everything Shari endured, she has found a path toward healing. Her courage in speaking out and her commitment to breaking generational cycles of abuse offers hope. The importance of believing children. Shari tried to get help for her siblings, but she wasn't taken seriously until it was almost too late. We must listen to and believe children when they report abuse. The need for protective reforms. Family vlogging remains largely unregulated. Children in family vlogs lack the protections that child actors have. Shari's story adds weight to calls for reform. Ultimately, this memoir asks us all to think more critically about what we consume online, to remember that real children exist behind the content we watch, and to consider the cost of the entertainment we enjoy. For Shari Franca, sharing her story is an act of reclamation, advocacy, and healing. It's a powerful reminder that even in the face of unimaginable pain, freedom is possible and worth fighting for. Content warning. This book contains descriptions of child abuse, emotional abuse, physical abuse, food deprivation, and mentions of sexual assault. If you or someone you know is experiencing abuse, please reach out to local authorities or support services. Key themes to remember. The impossibility of children consenting to fame. The gap between public persona and private reality. The lasting impact of emotional abuse and neglect. The characteristics of cult-like organizations. The failure of protective systems. The journey from survival to healing. The power of speaking truth. Thank you for engaging with this summary. If you found Shari's story impactful, consider supporting legislation to protect children in family vlogging, donating to organizations that support abuse survivors, or simply being more thoughtful about the content you consume online.